Welcome to the deep dive. We've gathered quite a stack of sources today, news reports, some official statements, initial expert thoughts, all focusing on a really tragic event, the recent Air India plane crash in Ahmedabad. Our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is to walk through this material together with you, pull out the key facts, the insights, and really get a clear picture of what we know so far. It's devastating. Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, it's tough material to go through, no doubt. A terrible moment. But these initial sources, they do give us a first look, at the immediate aftermath and, well, the very first clues for investigators.
Absolutely. So let's start right at the beginning. The event. What happened? The sources are clear. An Air India plane crashed, and it happened incredibly fast right after takeoff. This was on a Thursday afternoon, 1:38 p.m. local time, which works out to Air 8.08 GMT. And it didn't travel far from the airport at all. Came down in Ahmedabad in a residential spot called Magani Nagar. Sources say it's quite close to the airport. Destination was London Gatwick.
Right. And some of the sources, they include these really quite chilling visual descriptions, verified by the Associated Press, apparently. You have witness reports, video footage. It shows the jet coming down slowly, but, and this is crucial, it looked like its nose was up.
Nose up. But it wasn't climbing.
Exactly. Which is, well, highly unusual right after takeoff. Normally, nose up means gaining altitude. So it was nose up, but descending. Then it vanished behind some houses, and just boom, a giant fireball, followed by huge plumes of black smoke. That visual, the nose attitude combined with the lack of climb, that's one of the first big questions for investigators.
Yeah, that immediately signals something was fundamentally wrong. Nose up, but going down. Which leads us straight into the immediate scene and response. The descriptions are just awful. A massive fireball shooting up, wreckage everywhere, not just in one spot, but spread out. Charred remains, large chunks of the fuselage. One source mentioned a really specific detail. The plane's tail cone, the very back part with the stabilizer of fins damaged, was found stuck near the top of a building.
Wow. Yeah, that detail, the tail cone ending up there, it just speaks to the sheer force of the impact, how the aircraft disintegrated. Emergency teams were there quickly, thankfully. Firefighters were working on the wreckage, also trying to protect the nearby buildings that got hit. And the scale of it, well, the Indian Army was called in too, helping civil authorities clear debris, assisting the injured. It tells you how massive this was on the ground.
And that scale translates directly to the appalling human toll. The lives lost, and a sole survivor. Sources are putting the death toll at least 240 people killed. And that's not just people on the plane. It includes passengers, the crew, and, tragically, people on the ground in that residential area. We know for sure some victims were medical students. The plane apparently hit a college hostel. At least 5 students confirmed dead, 50 more injured, some critically.
Just terrible.
Authorities also feared, many more people might be buried in the rubble. There's a quote from a top police officer, Vidhi Chaudhary, mentioning the grim task ahead because many bodies were charred beyond recognition.
It's absolutely devastating. The ripple effects impacting so many people on the flight in that neighborhood. The sources also mention a prominent figure. Gujarat's former chief minister, Vijay Rupani, was sadly among those killed. A lawmaker confirmed that. But, amidst all this loss, there's this one report of a survivor, Vishwas Kumar Ramesh.
Yes, his story is just incredible. Harrowing, but incredible. Sources say he was actually thrown from the plane during the crash sequence. Doctors checked him out, said he was disoriented, multiple injuries, obviously, but seemed to be out of immediate danger. And what he told the medic, well, this could be really crucial.
What'd he say?
Ramesh apparently said the plane started going down right after takeoff. Then suddenly it split in two. That's what threw him out, just before he heard a massive explosion.
Wow, split in two. That's a very specific, very dramatic account. Investigators will definitely be trying to match that against the physical evidence, the wreckage, and, of course, the flight data. Okay, so let's look at the flight and aircraft details we have from the sources. The aircraft itself. A Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner. And this is notable. The Aviation Safety Network database, which is cited, says this is the first fatal crash involving this specific 787 model.
First one.
Okay.
And the flight itself.
Yeah.
Total of 242 people on board. That figure includes passengers and crew. The sources also give a breakdown of nationalities, mostly Indian, 169. Then 53 Britons, 7 Portuguese, and 1 Canadian. And as you mentioned, this all happened so fast, the crash was just 5 minutes after takeoff.
Just 5 minutes. That really, really narrows down the time frame for investigators, doesn't it? Which brings us to the initial clues and investigation context that the sources provide. India's aviation regulator, they stated the aircraft did issue a mayday call.
Okay, so they signaled distress.
Yes, that's the universal sign. But then, right after that mayday, the plane just went silent, didn't respond to any more calls from air traffic control. That sequence mayday, then silence. That's a really significant piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, definitely. And there's some early expert commentary mentioned too. Aviation consultant John M. Cox, he apparently echoed what we talked about earlier, that visual evidence. The nose being up but the plane not climbing. He said investigators would absolutely be looking hard at that. But he also, quite rightly, stressed how early it is.
Yeah.
Very, very, very early were his words.
Absolutely. Caution is key right now. But what is promising, potentially, for the investigation is the aircraft itself. This Boeing 787, it's a modern plane. It has incredibly extensive flight data monitoring systems. We're talking thousands of parameters recorded constantly.
Thousands, wow.
Yeah, everything from airspeed and altitude to engine performance, control inputs, system statuses, you name it. So, as Cox pointed out, once they recover that flight data recorder, the black box, they should be able to figure out, pretty quickly what happened just by analyzing that data dump. And this model, the 787, it's been flying since 2009. Over 1,000 have been delivered. So there's a lot of existing operational history and data for comparison.
Right, that black box data is going to be absolutely central to understanding this. Okay, finally, let's touch on the reactions in broader context. Understandably, huge reactions. India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, called it heartbreaking beyond words. Air India's chairman said their focus is purely on supporting the victims' families and those affected. And given the number of British nationals, significant reactions from the UK too. Keir Starmer and Cabinet Minister Lucy Powell, she mentioned the close UK-India ties, the large diaspora, and even King Charles and Queen Camilla expressed condolences, offered support.
Yeah, and the timing. This happened just days before the Paris Air Show. That's a massive global event for the aviation industry, for Boeing, for Airbus. Puts an unfortunate spotlight on safety right before their big showcase. And of course, it puts Boeing back under scrutiny. They've been in recovery mode for, over 6 years now? Ever since those 2 fatal crashes of the 737 MAX 8.
The Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines crashes, yeah.
Exactly. That context is unavoidable.
Definitely. And the sources noted the immediate market reaction, Boeing shares tumbled almost 9% before the U.S. markets even opened. It's also worth remembering, just for context, within India, the last major passenger crash there was in 2020. An Air India Express, Boeing 737, 21 people died in that one. But the absolute worst in India's history was way back in 1996. A mid-air collision, 349 deaths.
So placing this event within that history really underscores its severity for the region as well.
Okay, so let's try and distill this for you. Based on what these initial sources tell us, what are the core takeaways right now? We know the stark facts. A Boeing 787 crashed just 5 minutes out of Ahmedabad, hitting a residential zone. The human cost is immense. Over 240 confirmed dead, people on the plane, and tragically people on the ground, including those students, the former chief minister. And remarkably, there's one survivor. His account is both tragic and potentially very, very important.
Right. And we have those key early technical pointers.
Yeah.
The mayday call followed by silence. The very unusual visual reports, nose up, but descending, not climbing. Experts are flagging these immediately. And we've sort of put this into the bigger picture, Boeing's recent history, India's past aviation incidents. It all adds context.
And here's where, for me, it gets really critical, connecting those dots. That sole survivor's account. Saying the plane split in 2 before the explosion. That's such a specific, vivid description. Investigators have to square that with the technical data, with the wreckage analysis. Does it point to, say, a catastrophic structural failure, an in-flight breakup?
Exactly. Which brings us to a key question for you to think about as more details emerge from the investigation. Given those early clues, the strange flight path, the silence after the mayday, and that survivor's stark description of the plane splitting apart, what specific data points on that incredibly detailed 787 flight data recorder will be the absolute first things investigators look at? Will it be things like airspeed, pitch attitude, engine thrust levels, maybe control surface positions? What will give them the fastest clue about whether this was, say, an aerodynamic stall, a loss of control event, or need some kind of structural failure just before impact? That's something to keep in mind as we await information from those black boxes.